Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to the Insider Insight Show, DaveJanda.com, and our Operation Freedom platform. I'd like to thank you for being a subscriber to our platform and our service. Our goal is to provide you information that the bought-off, lamestream, fake media will never touch. And I assure you, today's show will fill that bill many times over. I'm honored to have back with me someone who is a very dear friend, someone I've known for years, someone who's had a huge impact in our listening audience on Operation Freedom over the past 7 years since he's been a guest, and that's Bob Mazur. Bob is one of the most, if not the most, courageous person I know. He is an incredible individual, and every time he comes and presents on air on our show on Operation Freedom and now on this platform on the Insider Insight Show, he actually puts his life on the line. He puts his life on the line 24/7. Bob won't talk about it, but to this day there are contracts on his life by the syndicate. See, Bob was an undercover agent for several U.S. agencies, including the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA. And Bob was put as the quarterback, and he's very humble and modest on this, but Bob led the operation that led to the takedown of Pablo Escobar and the Medellin drug cartel. In the process, Bob realized that the banking syndicate, the banksters as I call them, were integrally involved in the drug trafficking trade and willfully involved and actually sought out the businesses of the drug cartels. Bob has had his life threatened, as I said, every day for the past 20 years. Yet he continues to come forward on our platform and present that information. If you haven't read his book, The Infiltrator, you need to do it. Go to Amazon, get it. It's not that expensive, but it's a fantastic book. And if you haven't seen the movie The Infiltrator, which is based on Bob's life, you need to get it. And it's on Netflix. You can get it 24/7. I encourage you to do that because Bob's life of being an undercover DEA agent is all about what I say at the end of every presentation, dreaming big and daring to fail. I don't know anyone else who's dared to fail and taken on the syndicate more than Bob Mazur. I think you're going to find his interview to be interesting, forthcoming, and insightful. In the interview, I want you to watch out for a particular issue that Bob and I discussed, and that's taking down a syndicate, a crime syndicate. See, that's what we're dealing with here when we're dealing with Washington and Hollywood and Wall Street. This is the globalist crime syndicate. And recently I spoke about this on Greg Hunter's show, so you can go to USA Watchdog, or you can go to our platform here. I have the interview highlighted in the featured interview section with the last one with Greg Hunter. In fact, it was so popular, Zero Hedge picked up on the interview and actually ran an article entitled "The Rothschilds and the Rockefellers Must Go Down to Save America." And I actually think that headline was very accurate. The Rothschild-Rockefeller axis is the same axis that Bob was taking on the drug trade and taking on the criminal banking syndicate. And listen to the part of the interview where Bob talks about taking down the syndicate. Bob wanted to go deeper, as he outlined in our interview, of taking down the syndicate. And what Bob was referring to was Bob was not going to settle for taking down Pablo Escobar and the Medellin drug cartel. He wanted to go higher because he realized that there were ties going up into the government. Bob was blocked from doing that. And many of the people I believe Bob would have taken down if he was allowed to are not only household names, but they're names that continue to adversely affect the sovereignty of our country and your freedom. It's a great interview. I encourage you to listen to it several times. And then I encourage you to discuss what was presented with your family and your friends and your neighbors. And hopefully they will find merit in your discussion and also want to be a part of our family and our subscription platform. There are people, and Bob is not unique in this, and he's the first to admit this. There are many people, hundreds of people in our government, in every agency, that are just like Bob, that have been behind the scenes for decades, fighting for all of every American's freedom and liberty. And I truly believe that the rule of law is in the process of being reestablished here in our country. I believe that rule of law has been decimated over the past several decades as the globalists gained with their power and their control, with their ability to bribe and blackmail individuals within our government and people immediately around our government. But it's starting to fall apart. And a lot of that started with the election of Donald Trump in November of 2016. I'm not saying Trump is a saint. I understand he has significant problems and issues. And I believe conducted his life in some respects different than some of us would have conducted our lives. But I believe Trump's heart is directed at taking down the Rothschild-Rockefeller globalist axis. That doesn't mean Trump doesn't have ties to the globalists. I understand that. I'm not naive. But I believe there are different silos, different factions within the globalist syndicate. And I believe the globalist faction that he's most tied to is the faction that does want to see America and Americans prosper. Not at the expense of everyone else in the world, but possibly to work more harmonious with people around the world to create a better life for everybody. And that's why taking down the Bushes and the Clintons and the Obamas is so important. Not that they're high-level players within the Rothschild-Rockefeller axis. I hammered this in the Greg Hunter interview. You need to watch it. They're middle-level players, as is Soros. They're all middle-level players. But as Bob points out, you have to take the low players, the middle players down in order to get to the high players. And if you don't take out the high players, the system continues to evolve. It continues to have adverse effects on society. The high players are what I noted in that interview. And as Greg stated, you know, Dave, people don't mention the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers as being the problem here. You're the only one who does that. I don't know if it's because you're brave or because you're stupid, but I'm glad you did. You see, the only way we can defeat our enemy is identifying it. This politically correct attitude of, I'm not going to identify my enemy, only leads to the empowerment and the stability of our enemy. Interesting, when you start calling out the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers as being the enemy, part of the head of the snake, if you will, I get a lot of blowback. Folks will come back at me about, well, the Rockefellers, they're Christian. You're anti-Christian. No, I'm anti-evil. Just read David Rockefeller's memoir. He states, I'm guilty of trying to create a new world order and a one-world government that's going to strip everybody of their freedoms and liberties except us elites. He says that in his autobiography. And as far as the Rothschilds, the first thing his little dweebs around him start saying is, well, you're against the Rothschilds. You're an anti-Semite. No, I'm anti-evil. And so is everyone fighting for our collective freedoms and liberties. The Rothschilds and the Rockefellers have admitted Their goal is to empower themselves and enslave as many people as possible and strip freedom and liberty from as many people and their finances, your finances, as possible. Identification of the enemy is not being anti-Christian or anti-Islamic or anti-Semitic or anti-Martian. It's anti-evil, because that is what we're dealing with here. People that will do anything and everything to strip you of your freedom, your liberty, your finances, and your life. Just look at what Bob Mazur has gone through in his life in taking down this horrendous syndicate. And listen to the last story that I have Bob present in our interview. It's my favorite story. When the movie was being made, I kept pushing Bob, make sure you get that story in. Because it's really, really important. It's about the Federal Reserve. And Bob pushed for that story to be a part of the movie, and it was. It says a very important message about the incestuous relationship between these criminal syndicates and the criminal banking syndicate, and who runs and owns the criminal banking syndicate. Can you say Rothschilds and Rockefellers? You see, and that axis, the Rothschild-Rockefeller axis, has little puppets in play. Not just the middle-level people, the Obamas and the Clintons and the Bushes and the Soroses, but they have a lower level also involved that do a lot of their dirty work. And a good example of that is what we see happening with the outing of many of these people in the Department of Justice and the FBI. Now, this just hit, and you won't see it in the mainstream media. This was from RestoreAmericaGlory.com. New Strzok page text, those are the two FBI little lovebirds, are damning for Obama's White House. You see, because this is about, what all this is about, this Department of Justice, FBI, don't let anybody kid you. This is all about the failed attempted coup of a mid-level puppets, that being the Obamas and the Clintons and the Bushes, their coup attempt of removing Donald Trump, not part of the Rothschild-Rockefeller globalist axis, from office. That's why they attacked Trump 24/7. That's why they went after General Flynn, to get him out of there as quick as possible. Because remember, as I've outlined, General Flynn was the person, when he was the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, outed the fact that ISIS was owned and operated, funded, manipulated, funded and weaponized and trained by the United States, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Jordan, and Israel. And they had to get him out of there. Because the last thing they need is an honest guy shooting his mouth off. Because ISIS was part of the globalist syndicate to create chaos and to create an enemy for us to fictitiously go after. It's what the globalists do. They create an enemy, fake, and then out of that enemy create chaos and fear. That's how they try to paralyze the public. And out of that enemy, they get more power, control, and money. It's their business model. So now they have these little dweebs doing their work of Strzok and Page in the FBI, along with McCabe and Comey and Weissman and Baker and Prestep. They're all low-level puppets. But here's what came out in RestoreAmericaGlory.com. Republican congressional investigators released a new set of text messages between FBI officials Peter Strzok and Lisa Page this week, and they proved that the Obama White House was coordinated secretly with the intelligence community in the Trump-Russia investigation. Quite contrary to the story they were telling the public. In the text, GOP investigators say Strzok and Page indicate that the White House, the CIA, under Brennan, the FBI, the NSA, under Clapper, the Department of Justice, and the Democrat leadership in the Senate, Harry Reid, were all colluding and sharing information as the 2016 race between Trump and Hillary Clinton was just getting started in August of 2016. And their insurance policy was to create the fake Russian dossier, the fake Russia collusion story, so that if Trump won, he would be impeached and removed. But it's all falling apart, and it's all falling apart because of an investigation through the Department of Justice led by the Inspector General Michael Horowitz. I've told you before, remember his name. This is really important. Yes, okay, now people are going to say, I get it. Horowitz was appointed under the Obama administration. Yeah, and who better to take it down? Along with this Utah prosecutor who was also appointed under the Obama administration, Huber, who Sessions tapped months ago, as I understand it, to be working with Horowitz in restoration of the rule of law and taking down whoever they came in contact with that they felt was violating the law or departmental policies. Actually, it gets even, understand something, they can take these people down for not just, for beyond, even if they don't meet the criteria of violating the law, statutes, but if they violate Department of Justice policies, they can be taken down. And the fact that Sessions has had this this prosecutor working behind the scenes with Horowitz is far more deleterious, far more detrimental to the globalist syndicate than if he would appoint a second special counsel. Look, Sessions is not working against Trump. The word I hear behind the scenes is that that's kind of like the WWF or WWE, fake professional wrestling thing. They've been creating a lot of distractions. I believe, as I mentioned in the Hunter interview several times now, Mueller, I believe, was flipped by Trump the day before he was appointed, when he met with Trump in the Oval Office. Trump flipped him by utilizing Mueller's involvement in Uranium One and other nefarious activities, and that's how he flipped him. This Mueller show is a sideshow. It's a distraction from what's really going on about restoring the rule of law, and that's with the Inspector General of the Department of Justice, Horowitz, and Huber. Now, 1,200,000 pages, as I understand it, on January 12th, 2018 at 6 p.m., confirmed by independent reporter Chad Pergram, the best reporter on Capitol Hill, not tied to the syndicate, said, yeah, this information from the Department of Justice Inspector General was turned over to 3 committees, not 4, House Intelligence, House Judiciary, and Senate Judiciary, not Senate Intelligence, because the guys running that committee, Baker on the Republican side from North Carolina and Warner from Virginia, Democrat side, are tainted globalist puppets. So Horowitz had this figured out. And he turned over that information to those subcommittees. And since then, what has happened? Well, 2 hours after he turned over that information on January 12th, the first Uranium One indictment happened. First one, 2 hours later. In addition, the Nunes memo came out the next week. Why? Because Horowitz provided the firepower and the cover for Nunes to get that out. It also shut down Adam Schiff. After that report, McCabe was called before Congress. McCabe was fired. Strzok, Page, Baker, Prestap, Comey, all were outed. or was outed at the Department of Justice because his wife was also working at Fusion GPS, helping create this fake dossier. Fusion GPS was exposed, as well as the fake dossier, and the fact that it was paid for by the DNC and the Clinton campaign. There was exposure of the bias of the FISA court, that this fake dossier was used to get the FISA court surveillance warrant that was utilized on Trump, which entrapped Flynn. The judge stepped down, recused himself. Flynn's sentencing was postponed. All of that happened after January 12th. All of that, immediately after. In addition, there are these headlines. Peter Strzok ignored evidence of Clinton's server breach. Where do you think that came from? Right, the Inspector General's report. Australian diplomat whose tip launched the Russia probe has a $25 million tie to the Clintons. Where do you think that came out of? Right, the Inspector General's report. FBI Deputy Director McCabe told agents to lie about Benghazi. Where do you think that came from? Right, the Inspector General's report. And as I outlined in January, the information from the Inspector General's report was going to be dripped out, kind of like Chinese water torture on the globalists, and that's exactly what's happening. And now we have somebody coming out from ex-FBI Assistant Director saying the upcoming release to the public of the Inspector General's report is pure TNT. You think? He goes on to say, the Inspector General's report is thought to include evidence of outgoing Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe ordering agents to alter the 302 forms, the paperwork, and agent files after interviewing someone. Remember, I talked to you about this weeks ago, that the 302 reports were altered when they interviewed Flynn. That's why initially the FBI said Flynn didn't lie, and then they said, oh, well, Flynn did lie, and, well, we're going to prosecute him. It's because McCabe ordered Strzok to change the 302 forms and other agents to change the 302 forms. Where do you think that information came from? Right, the Inspector General's report. Or this, new texts reveal FBI Peter Strzok had relationship with recused judge in Flynn case. Inspector General report. Trump slams Comey, and Sessions fired FBI's McCabe a day before retirement. In fact, when Sessions fired McCabe, he said the following. Sessions noted that both the Justice Department Inspector General Michael Horowitz, as well as the FBI's disciplinary office had found that Mr. McCabe had made an unauthorized disclosure to the news media and lacked candor, including under oath on multiple occasions. And then we also have the information coming out. The Obama Department of Justice ordered 500,000 fugitives deleted from background check database. Quote, that was a decision that was made under the previous administration. A FBI Deputy Director David Bowdish just stated. Look, folks, this Inspector General's report is huge. And no, they're not going to release 1.2 million pages of it to us. Eventually, it's going to be just parceled out. And that's meant for maximal effect. Plus, I think the vast majority of the American public can't get their head around this stuff. And what it's going to show is that there was an attempted coup of a standing American president, that being Donald Trump, by the immediate past president, Barack Obama, a member of his team, Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State, another former president, Bill Clinton, and the Bush involvement, all mid-level puppets of the Rothschild-Rockefeller globalist axis that attempted a coup of the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. And the vast majority of Americans don't realize it, but you do. And one of the reasons why you realize it, I'd like to think, is because you're a subscriber to this service. You are months ahead of what will transpire in our country. And when you listen to this interview today with Bob Mazur, listen to what Bob says about taking down a syndicate. It's key. It's key. And that's why it has taken so long. I'd like to thank you for your subscription to this service. Please let others know about what we do here on our platform. Hopefully they'll want to be part of our subscription family as well. Until next time, this is Dave Janda, signing off. Dream big and dare to fail. Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to DaveJanda.com and our Insider Insight show, as well as our platform for Operation Freedom. I'd like to thank you for subscribing to the service, and we have a very special guest today, an individual who has been a featured guest on our Sunday radio show, Operation Freedom, for a number of years. Every time Bob Mazur comes on, the feedback I get, which is immediate, is you got to get him back right away. Nobody has the type of background that he does that's out there speaking in the mainstream media, let alone the alternative media. And he provides information, folks tell me repetitively, our listeners, that actually inspire them to go out and, if you will, be warriors for freedom, to do the right thing for our country. And essentially what Bob's, if you will, life story is about is putting the interests of our country and every American citizen ahead of his own. Bob has put his life on the line and continues to this day, puts it on 24/7 to enhance your freedom and your security. Let me give you a little background on Bob Mazur. Bob has earned global acclaim as one of the world's leading experts on the financial escapades of the underworld. There is no one with more first-hand knowledge, operative word, first-hand knowledge, about how international banks and businesses cater to those who own the nearly $2 trillion, with a T, $2 trillion in criminal proceeds laundered annually. For years, in the eyes of organized crime leaders, he was a highly successful mob-connected money launderer that helped manage their illicit fortunes. His clients, some of the most famous and deadly drug cartel bosses, Pablo Escobar, offered a $500,000 price tag for his head when arrests were made around the world, and he was revealed to be a highly trained U.S. federal undercover agent. Bob is the author of a great book. You should get it if you haven't already, but you should get it and give it as gifts. That's what I do. The Infiltrator, a memoir about his undercover life, much of which was spent acting as a conduit between ruthless drug barons and corrupt, legitimate-appearing senior executives that claimed billions in blood-stained money through otherwise respectable international banks and businesses. Bob has transformed his underworld experience and current-day involvement in the money laundering field into a remarkable lesson for today's business sector. After completing a highly decorated 27-year career as a federal agent in 3 U.S. agencies, Bob is now president of KYC Solutions, a firm that provides speaking, expert witness, and consulting services to companies worldwide. Bob's book, The Infiltrator, is now available in 10 languages in more than 50 countries and is the basis for the internationally released major motion picture by the same name, The Infiltrator, starring Bryan Cranston, Diane Kruger, and other internationally known cast members. Folks, it is my favorite movie. Of course, I'm biased because I consider myself a friend of Bob, and I know Bob's story inside out. It is a remarkable movie, and in fact, as a special treat, Bob provided us with a clip at the end of our interview that we're going to run about the movie The Infiltrator. It's excellent. For more information about Bob Mazur, his book and the film based on his life, it can be found at his website, Robert Mazur, M-A-Z-U-R, robertmazur.com. Bob, welcome to DaveJanda.com and Operation Freedom and the Insider Insight Show.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I appreciate it.
So, Bob, before we go into current money laundering activity that's occurring around the world by the, if you will, the criminal syndicate, by way of foundation, educate our listeners on your undercover work as a DEA agent and your involvement with what you did to take down one of the largest drug cartels in the world, or help take down, or put a big dent in it, the Medellin drug cartel, of which the book The Infiltrator and the movie The Infiltrator is based upon.
Sure. Well, when I was with the U.S. Customs Office of Enforcement, that's now Homeland Security Investigations, I was working on a task force, multi-agency task force. Our goal was to identify the principal money launderers for the Medellin cartel and to attempt to prosecute them. And we initially used a lot of the traditional methods, wiretaps, informants, search warrants, historical witnesses. But we ultimately came to the conclusion that the most effective tool would be a long-term undercover operation where we would infiltrate their money laundering systems by providing services and then climb our way up the credibility ladder to get to the people who, the beneficial owners of the money, the leaders of the cartel, the command and control, and the major money launderers. So I volunteered to be a long-term undercover agent, and I was blessed with training that really saved my life, in my view. I got to be working with and trained by some of the most experienced former long-term undercover agents, including Joe Pistone, the former FBI agent that the book Donnie Brasco and the movie Donnie Brasco is based upon. But there are also psychologists and trainers who were involved in that process. And after completing training, then I was given about a year and a half to put together what I think is one of the more sophisticated fronts that's been used in long-term undercover. I was embedded in real businesses as a corrupt, mob-connected businessman willing to launder money for the Colombian cartels. And I and my partner got the opportunity to be introduced through some lower-level money brokers, and then eventually worked our way up ultimately to people who were reporting directly to Pablo Escobar. And in the course of that, I wound up becoming a conduit for them to what was then one of the largest, it was the seventh largest privately held bank in the world, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, BCCI, and other financial institutions as well. So I wound up dealing with people on a board level in the banking world who had an insatiable appetite to basically take money-seeking secrecy from governments, from clients that wanted to hide that money. So it wasn't just drug traffickers, it was money launderers, it was people who were involved in pilfering treasuries, people who were involved in dealing with prohibited nations, massive conspiracies to commit tax evasion, people who had money that they didn't want other governments to know. And so these bankers provide services that camouflage that money and enable it to cross borders in a way where it otherwise appears that that money is legitimate. So after a period of about 2 years in recording roughly 1,200 conversations, that became the cornerstone of the prosecution of senior bank officials, the bank itself, and members of the cartel. We then went on to prosecute other bank officers within the BCCI based on the cooperation that we got from the first round of money launderers. After that, I, unfortunately, about a month after the undercover operation, 2 law enforcement agencies and an intelligence agency notified me that there was a contract on my life. So my wife and I and 2 kids basically went underground for years. And during that time frame, I was involved in testifying in many trials, not just in the U.S., but outside the U.S., one of which was 6 months long. And in that case, I testified for an entire 3 months, every single court day. I got on the stand in the middle of March and got off in the middle of June. And that was quite an experience. But the bad guys had unlimited money for defense, much more than us. And I forget how many tens of millions of dollars it was documented that they put in an effort to try to overcome those charges, but they didn't. I then was recruited by DEA to go to that agency and do another long-term undercover operation, which I did for 2.5 years in Panama and in Florida, where I was posing as a money launderer, working with the money launderers of the Cali cartel at the time was the most had taken over for the Medellin cartel. And so that's the perspective from which I got the opportunity, I think, somewhat uniquely to see the synergy between organized crime and the international banking community.
You know, Bob, it takes a very special, courageous person, and actually family, to do what you and your family went through. If you had to do it again, and if I asked your wife and your kids, would they go through this process again? Everything you went through? Because you've made tremendous, tremendous good for our country in what you did. But there's a big price you paid. I mean, you paid a huge price, as did your family. Would you do it again?
Um, if I didn't have the support of my best friend, my wife, I would have crashed and burned on those operations. The real heroes to the stories for men and women who want to serve the country are the sacrifices that their families make in order for them to attempt to achieve the goals that they try to achieve on behalf of the public. I guess I could say that my biggest sin in doing what I did was becoming basically addicted to getting the information and the intelligence that I knew, at least in my own mind, I had convinced myself, unfortunately, that there would be no other agent that would ever be able to get that high within the underworld, and I became so obsessed in such a I was so addicted to get that new information that I put everything else aside. I can only imagine it must be very similar to someone fighting on a battlefield. I was in the military, but I wasn't on a battlefield getting shot at. And I can only imagine that if you were there, every single ounce of your being, your mind, your body is completely focused like a laser on your enemy, and protecting your brothers and sisters who are around you. And that's really that's all I had room for in my mind. So my family, thank God, were able to make the adjustments and be there for me when I came home. Would I do it again now? No. I think I've put my family through enough, and I think that it's time for some of the other very, very brave and much smarter people than me who continue to serve the public and are in these agencies and accept these long-term undercover assignments. So, oddly enough, after I left government service, I had an occasion to go to Virginia and meet with people in a unit called the Special Operations Division of DEA, which is a very unique elite group that works on the biggest cases in the world that are addressed. They are cases that oftentimes have targets that are outside the United States. Victor Boot, who was the biggest illegal arms dealer for the underworld, was taken down by Special Operations Division. There are many, many foreign-based drug lords who have been taken down. And I happened to be with them getting an unclassified briefing on a particular case. And in the course of it, they started talking with me about a new threat that they were trying to deal with. It was a major, major money laundering operation based in the Middle East. And that undercover operation or that problem they had, they asked me, how would I deal with it if I was still on the job, and I explained how I thought I would approach it, and then I was surprisingly asked, would I be willing to come back on contract to do that? And I
Not if I want to walk in the front door at home.
I said, I've got 6 very good reasons that I'm not eligible, and they're all grandkids. And so thank you, but no thank you. So I think my answer today is clearly no.
So, Bob, as you nuzzled up to these big, notorious criminals, the Escobars of the world, did anything, as you got closer to them, surprise you? I mean, did you look at some of these people and go, this guy's in a bad business, but he's really, really, I mean, even though he's, God knows, off to how many people, but he's really seems like an okay guy. Did you have any of that happen, or were they all just slime from the very beginning to the end?
Well, these are very different people. They are very different than even Hollywood at times portrays them, although I must say that Benjamin Bratt, who plays a very high-level transporter for the Medellin cartel, whose real name is Roberto El Caino, did a wonderful job of giving a very clear picture of what a person at that level is really like. Many times these people are, they speak 3-4 languages. They are pillars of the community. They are respected. They own outwardly appearing, very legitimate, high-end businesses. And so, in order for me to deal with them, I basically had to trick them into sharing with me their deepest secrets that they would only share and sometimes wouldn't even share with the people that they most trusted. So, as I told Bryan Cranston, and he kind of laughed about this when I said it, I said, I'm really not a good actor. And he said, well, I beg to differ. I kind of think you probably really are. And I said, I can only play one part. I can't be the guy that he played in the Netflix series, and I can't, he can play all kinds of different parts, but I'm stuck in one.
Right.
I have a business background. One of the keys to working long-term undercover is to tell as few lies as you possibly can. My character, Robert Musella, was a person with a business administration, finance background, worked in a bank, worked in a brokerage firm, had an accounting background, knew how to run a business. All of that was common with me. I worked in a bank and a brokerage firm before I started working for the government, and I knew what those types of what it would be like to be that type of a person. And so in doing that, I really do believe I'm not a great actor, but I really had to trick myself into, in a sense, liking. I can't. There are people I like and people I don't like.
Right.
And people I don't like, there's just no way I can fake it.
Yeah, me neither. Guilty. Yeah.
Like Roberto Alcano, other than the fact that he was a transporter of tons and tons of cocaine.
Right.
He was the type of person, had he not been involved in that type of business, that I could see myself actually becoming a friend with.
Right.
And and some of the bankers probably, in the same way. And you get to know these people not just as, to give you an example, I knew Roberto as a drug dealer, but I knew him as a husband. I knew him as a father. I knew his 3 girlfriends. I knew everything about him. And when you deal with people on that level, you almost have to give a little piece of your heart in order to do that. And it's a hole that can never be filled. And there is a lot of, I think, stress to that type of a life in the underworld. I remember when the case went down and many people were arrested. People in my office were partying. It was a happy time for them. For me, it wasn't. I knew that I had done my job. I became the eyes and ears of the government inside their criminal organizations. But I knew that what had happened was now going to impact people, many people, not just the defendants, but their spouses and their kids for the rest of their lives. And that's a little bit of a heavy thing sometimes for people to carry. I was a little shy about sharing that before I wrote my book. And I think at the end, what I came to the conclusion on that issue was, had I reacted the way that people who didn't have that personal contact with these people had, if I had been high-fiving and laughing and thinking this was funny, to me that doesn't speak well for the character of someone. To me, it was my conscience. And I think it's good for governments to have a conscience, and for people who have a tremendous responsibility and have a tremendous power that they're given by the people when they take the oath to do everything and anything that they can possibly do to represent the people. That that's not a thing to take lightly. It's a very, very big thing to carry, and it's something that you need to do in a very respectful and I think devoted way. Devoted not to your career per se, devoted to trying to identify and do the thing that is going to best benefit the public that you serve. That's really what public service is all about. So in doing that public service, yes, I got to know these people well, and yeah, there are aspects of this that I think are portrayed fairly well in the film when the relationship between Bryan Cranston, the actor, and Benjamin Bratt is portrayed.
And since this all went down, Bob, have you had any interactions with any of these bigger players that you brought down, other than, there obviously there was a contract issued on you and the like? But I mean, has there been any from the other side, from the guys who you brought down, saying, you got me, and but you know what, I'm now out of the stuff that was hurting people. Has there been anything like that at all?
Yeah, first there's some people who will never forgive, and
No.
certainly I've received threats.
Yeah.
But with respect to some of them that were arrested, I became a part of a debriefing team,
Right.
and that became a little bit of a challenge psychologically, I think, for them too, because they had been dealing with me on a level where they thought that I was a co-criminal,
Right.
and now I'm carrying a badge and I'm a completely different person. But as I said to them, because I could see it in their eyes when they first had contact with me after my being an undercover agent was revealed, they wanted to rip my heart out.
Right.
But as I said to them, listen, I was just doing my job.
Right.
It was my job to find out as much as I could about the criminal activity that was going on. And now it's my job to see if there is a way, if you want to provide substantial assistance. There's a process. You have an opportunity, if you truly did fully cooperate, to earn the right to have a reduction in your sentence, or at least to appeal to the court for the judge to make that decision. And I'm here to do my job now, just the way I was here before. And I've got no hard feelings. And if I can facilitate your cooperation and you earn it, then that's part of the process, and that's what I'm here to do. And some of them accepted that. Some of them I never had any contact with again, and some who got away have made it known that they're not happy with me.
Bob, I am continually chastised for my characterization of the international banking community as being a syndicate, as being a criminal enterprise. And as is outlined in your book and the movie and what you've already spoken about in this interview and many other interviews you've done with us in Operation Freedom, your involvement in the drug trafficking world led you to interact with a number of bankers, international bankers, not just in our country, but around the world. And Bob, of the bankers that you interacted with, they were obviously knowledgeable about the fact that you did not hide it, that you were representing a criminal enterprise, a drug syndicate. Many people find it hard to believe that bankers would interact with an individual who's representing a criminal syndicate. But in fact, Bob, your experience was that the vast majority of the bankers you interacted with, and tell me if I'm wrong, but they were happy to work with you and get your money. Is that wrong?
No, that's the case. And, I think that one of the most interesting things that was said to me by convicted former senior officers of BCCI was that they kind of said, well, we don't understand why you're picking on us because we're not doing anything different than the rest of the international banking community. Their argument was that their careers had not started at BCCI. Their careers had started at many other very reputable international banks. And their claim was that at BCCI, they had taken what they thought were the best of the best techniques to handle this money-seeking secrecy from governments and providing the same kind of service that the rest of the world, international banking world was offering. I don't believe that every single international bank is involved in this type of activity, but I do believe that there is a segment of the international banking and business community that markets this money. And, since the BCCI case, which was really the first time the mask was ever ripped off of the corrupting corporate policies of an international bank. There have been many banks that have admitted criminal offenses in connection with their attempting to hide money from other governments. I mean, I can go through a quick list, but you know, I have them kind of broken into categories. But there is a technique that was used by BCCI for the movement of drug money that's called stripping wires, and basically that means stripping information from wire transfers that normally dollar wire transfers that normally go through filters through SWIFT and the Fed that would identify them to be likely to be connected to some type of illegal transaction. Most often that had been done over the last decade for those who were trying to illegally deal with Iran. Iran and other nations who were sanctioned and dollar transactions with them were prohibited. So to give you a few examples, Lloyd's Bank, they admitted to the criminal conduct of stripping wires. They paid a $350 million fine. Credit Suisse, the same, paid a $536 million fine. ABN AMRO, paid a $500 million fine for doing that same type of thing. Barclays, $298 million fine. Ing, $619 million fine. Standard Chartered Bank, $667 million in fines. BNP Paribas paid a $9 billion in 2014, a $9 billion fine. And Commerce Bank paid a $1.45 billion, and Deutsche Bank was fined for that same type of activity. But then when you get into drug-related type cases, Bank Atlantic, $10 million fine, American Express, $55 million, Union Bank of California, $21.6 million, Wachovia Bank, $160 million, Ocean Bank, $11 million, the Lebanese Canadian Bank, $102 million, and they went out of business. HSBC, a $1.9 billion fine, and it also admitted to criminal conduct in the movement of monies for the Sinaloa cartel and the Norte de Valle cartel, nearly $1 billion in currency. And there have been two banks just this past month that have admitted criminal conduct in connection with their movement of illicit funds. So, I mean, it does go on, and you know, when you take a look at it and you try to figure out, well, why does this happen? Why does this go on? But I think you can look at a very interesting study that was done by the United Nations on Drugs and Crime a few years ago, attempting to identify, with the help of their member nations, just how much money is out there seeking secrecy from governments. And what they did is they quantified how much money on a global basis every year is generated by various types of illegal activity. With respect to drug trafficking, they clocked it at about $400 billion a year from the sale of illegal drugs. When you add the other crimes into that, huge tax conspiracies, pilfering treasuries, dealing with prohibited nations, white-collar crime, it comes to roughly $1.7 trillion a year seeking money laundering services. Money laundering is a very, very big business. I was a member of the black money markets when I was working undercover, and I can tell you that as a member of the black money markets, I was the crossroads, or part of the crossroads, between the underworld and the legitimate world. Because the dollars that are out there that are available from drug traffickers are sought by legitimate businessmen, knowing they're buying illicit funds, going to the black market. They do that because their nations create tariffs, taxes, duties to convert their local currency to dollars that is so oppressive that they want to go to the black market to buy them more cheaply. So, I mean, one of the biggest buyers of narco dollars around the world are importers in countries that don't offer U.S. dollars or offer the exchange of their currency at 25-30% cost. And so importers around the world come to the black market and they buy these dollars, and then in turn, the traffickers get through the black money markets whatever those importers are willing to give up in exchange for the dollars. And sometimes it's goods, sometimes it's local currency, it can be bank balances, and now I can tell you the black money markets are thriving in China. China is the land of opportunity for those people who have illicit funds and they want to wind up trading them. And there's a few very specific reasons for China to be of such great interest to the drug cartels, as well as other criminal organizations. Number one, oftentimes the possessors of these narco dollars want to buy goods. And the world's largest free trade zones are in China. But not only are the largest free trade zones in China, much of the product that is being produced in those free trade zones are counterfeit products. And so if you can take $1 billion in narco money and buy $1 billion worth of counterfeit goods and flood Latin America with those counterfeit goods to unsuspecting buyers, you can triple your money that you've already made from your drug trade. So you have that. You also have the fact that there are restrictions in China for the wealthy. China will not allow the wealthy to export more than $50,000 a year to invest outside China. So what are the people who have money that want to buy a mansion in Vancouver, which isn't unusual,
right,
or Seattle? They go to the black market, and they make available within the borders of China a bank balance, and they'll take the narco dollars that are sitting someplace in Canada or the United States. And why is that advantageous to traffickers? Well, the pharmaceutical industry in China is virtually unregulated.
Right.
It is where the greatest amount of fentanyl comes from that is sold by the cartels. It is also where many of the cartels get the massive amounts of precursor chemicals they need to make methamphetamine. And so, again, China becomes important. And China also becomes important because they will not honor Western law enforcement due process. You can't go there and subpoena bank records the same way you can if you went down to virtually in almost any other country. So you have that. And those are that plus the fact that China, especially the free trade zones of China, which are Guangzhou is one of the big ones that has been used by traffickers. It's in close proximity to Macau and to Hong Kong, which is an easy place to dispose of your large volumes of currency. So there are many, many reasons why China is now becoming a mecca for the laundering of these types of monies. And so when I worked in the black market, free trade zones were definitely the place to go. The biggest one at that time was the Cologne Free Zone, which is now the second largest one. It's in Panama. It's the second largest one in the world. And so the other ones are still active, but China has certainly come to the front of the class.
And in fact, there's all this talk now of the opioid epidemic, right? And you outlined this. Many of these opioids are actually coming through this black market type of relationship through China.
Yeah, they are, and they're you can buy them online, especially through the dark web, using cryptocurrencies in a very secretive way. It is extremely troubling to me when we look at the opioid problem that we face as a nation and as the world faces. Yes, China and the unregulated pharmaceutical companies carry a big burden of guilt as it relates to it, but we unfortunately have in our own country legal pharmaceutical companies that committed criminal offenses in misleading the public about the addictiveness of OxyContin, oxycodone. They lied about the ability to destroy the time release features when you crush the tablets. And 15 years ago, we had our own pharmaceutical companies laying the foundation for these problems. We've had people who were criminally prosecuted within our own pharmaceutical industry and fined very, very heavily. And that's another problem, another sieve in the horror of the opioid crisis here in the United States.
You know, Bob, I recently had a conversation here in the People's Republic of Ann Arbor with some folks. They're saying, you know, this money laundering problem is a huge problem. We've listened to your interviews with Bob Mazur, and they said, but, you know, Dave, there's no way it can be fixed. There's just too many big sardines in the can on this that are in the can that are benefiting from it, and there's really no way it could ever be shut down. And my response to them was, yeah, there is. Let me tell you something. I said, if Bob Mazur is put in the head of the DEA or Department of Homeland Security, I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow, but I'm telling you something. The money laundering activities that are currently occurring, that didn't end, that are currently occurring, would be significantly stymied. Am I wrong in that, Bob?
Well, you know, I think that to give up, are we going to give up on finding a cure for cancer, despite the fact that we know what it, you know, how it ravages people? And I mean, we're not going to give up. And this is it's like giving up on trying to achieve world peace. We shouldn't be giving up. And this is a problem that we have to continue to fight. And I think we do need to really look in the mirror and try to figure out what has been missing from the formula to try to address these problems. We do need to continue on the supply side to cut off the heads of the snakes. The command and control needs to be continually disrupted. I'm telling you, the financial wherewithal of these criminal organizations is completely outguns the resources that law enforcement has available to them. And the reason that continues to happen is because of the professional money launderers that transfer the mountains of currency and bring them into an appearance in the community of legitimate businesses that can corrupt. And we needn't look too far to see the corrupting power. We have a country like Venezuela, which has been, in my view, completely corrupted by the cartels. There are people within the intelligence community, the law enforcement community, the military, and the political world of Venezuela who have sold out to the cartels. It is a place where the checker game of getting drugs by the cartel into Europe starts out of Venezuela because of their ideological and their economic alignment with Iran, Syria, Lebanon. It is a haven for Hezbollah. It has facilitated the work that Hezbollah now does with the Mexican and Colombian cartels in the drug world. We look at Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. All their leadership has been eroded by the corruption of the cartels. Mexico, Colombia still has major problems. We face huge problems in our own backyard with respect to the corrupting influence of these criminal organizations, and so that needs to continue on the supply side. But I really do believe we need to re-examine education, treatment, and economic opportunity in the strongholds where the drug world has eroded the character of, unfortunately, communities. And we need to be working more on the demand side.
You know, Bob, it's in the movie, and maybe maybe my interpretation was wrong, but the interpretation or the impression I got in the movie, toward the end of the movie, is that your superiors that weren't in the field, but your superiors wanted to end the sting operation that you were the quarterback for. And I got the impression that you wanted this to play out a bit longer because there were some people higher on the totem pole that you thought you could get. Was my impression wrong?
No, your impression is right. You know, and I'm glad you made that reference to my role kind of as being a quarterback, because I must say that the success of that operation was due to the team. And I get far more credit than I deserve because I had the ball in my hand a lot being the primary undercover agent, but there were more than 250 law enforcement officers who put unbelievable amounts of time and talent toward the team's success. And that's why this operation succeeded. But yeah, I had an opportunity to meet the then president of the bank. There were some very delicate issues intertwined. The Bank of Credit and Commerce International had ingratiated themselves on some of the best known U.S. political figures, and BCCI was an interesting crossroads between the drug world, the intelligence world, intelligence community, and the political arena, not just in the United States, but in other countries as well. And I don't think that that's very unusual for the private client divisions of highly powerful, successful international banks. The guy who I was dealing with, who was the financial advisor at BCCI, who handled my relationship, was also handling the relationship for Manuel Noriega. And so I was getting information real time about what monies were being moved on Noriega's behalf, and that banker was also handling accounts for the CIA. And his father was the former head of the national police for Pakistan, which includes the ISI, which is their CIA. And there were terrorists who were having funds that were being laundered by BCCI. So I was basically in a Star Wars bar of bad guys that included quote good guys from the political side of the fence.
Bob, do you think that, obviously based on what you just said, that there were some political figures that put pressure on your superiors and said, "This is over because it's not going any further"?
Well, yeah, I was specifically told, at one stage, focus on the drug money issues, and that's it. As I was dealing with some of the bankers, what I came to learn and recorded in conversations was that the BCCI secretly owned at least 2, and I think ultimately 3 U.S. bank chains. Including one in Washington, D.C., and the CEO of that bank was the former Secretary of Defense in the United States.
That's special.
There were a number of different reasons, I think, that some people thought that it would be better to end the operation. And frankly, some of it, I think, it came out in John Kerry headed up a Senate subcommittee that looked very deeply into this, and his findings are all public. That subcommittee's findings are all public, and what they said was that there was some factions of leadership at U.S. Customs that viewed this as a great opportunity for an October surprise in a November election, and something that they could use to ingratiate themselves on people that they thought were going to be in political power, because they felt as though that this was going to catapult their careers and put them into more favorable competition for the new drug czar position and for heads of agencies. So, those kinds of conversations and what people were thinking and why they were doing it, they weren't meetings that I was invited to. I was just very, very upset at the time that the operation was ending when it did. But I'm probably the worst person to judge, because I got so close, and I told you before, I admit this. I was addicted to getting information. I took all kinds of chances there near the end that I look at that I think a reasonable person probably shouldn't have taken. I was accused in a meeting with a respected member of the cartel of being a DEA undercover agent, and I needed to talk my way out of that. And And I wound up convincing some of my handlers that the best way to do that was to let me go alone to a meeting in Miami, one-on-one in a hotel room. And I guess I must have been good at convincing people, because I convinced them to do that without a cover team. And now that I look back on it, I had no idea what was on the other side of that door. Tactically speaking, as an agent, that's not a reasonable risk to take. So, just thank God we got what we got, and we got an opportunity to expose a relationship between a cartel and a financial institution, because clearly, once we did the search warrants, the records clearly showed this bank had been dealing with the cartel for quite some time.
That's right.
In very big numbers. So it wasn't like we were tricking them into doing this by any means.
Bob, I want to conclude the interview with, and my favorite story. And you talked about being addicted to getting the big, juicy bite of information that's going to tear the whole thing apart. And at one point you were talking to a person involved in this syndicate, and this person said to you, well, you know who the largest money launderer is in, I don't know, North America, the world, whatever it might be. And you were thinking, and it's, you were like, oh, this is going to be huge. This is going to be enormous. Tell that story briefly, because again, I think it goes to the heart of the matter of who's really involved in this. Educate our listeners about that conversation.
Okay. That was a conversation I had at a social club in Miami, called Regine's. And there were Regine's in most major cities throughout the world at the time. And movers and shakers would go there. So I was there with one of the BCCI officers who handled Colombia. And he said to me, Bob, do you know who the biggest money launderer in the United States is? Man, I thought I was going to bring this bone back to my office, and this was going to be fantastic. And he said, well, it's the Federal Reserve, of course. And I said, come on, what are you talking about? He goes, listen, this is a true story. And your listeners can Google this, and they can confirm it for themselves. But what he said to me was, the central bank, the Bank of the Republic in Colombia, their central bank, had established a policy, and their government established a policy, that no Colombian could lawfully maintain a U.S. dollar account, period. They weren't allowed to deal in U.S. dollars and have an account. And he said, but what they do is that the central bank has opened what they call the sinister window, or the anonymous window. So your listeners can Google the sinister window, Bank of the Republic, Colombia. And he said, and this was going on as we were having the conversation. He goes, they take anonymously from anybody in Colombia as much U.S. dollars as they can possibly carry, and they exchange it for Colombian pesos. And he said, do you know what the central bank does with that money? I said, no, I have no idea. And he said, well, just like most central banks, they are members of the Federal Reserve. So they put this money on pallets, shrink wrap it. I mean, we're talking 6 feet by 6 feet by 6 feet.
Right.
We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars being flown back to the United States and being credited on behalf of the central bank in Colombia to their account with the Federal Reserve. And his point to me was, don't you think that there's someone with enough intelligence at the Federal Reserve scratching their head saying, wait a minute, it's illegal for a Colombian to have a U.S. dollar account, but their central bank is sending us hundreds of millions of dollars, but no one asked any questions. Ultimately, in the early 1990s, due to the exposure of this, that practice stopped. But at the time that we had the conversation, it was active, and a very, very deep stream of dope money was flowing from Colombia's central bank to the Federal Reserve.
Bob, I'd like to thank you, not only for your friendship, which is very important to me, but thank you for everything that you and your family have done for our country and continue to do by speaking out and educating folks on not only what has happened, but what is happening and what can be done to address the issues that adversely affect every citizen of our country and every citizen of the world. You are an incredibly courageous, gifted individual, Bob, as is your entire family, for having gone through this and continuing to go through it, because unfortunately your life was forever changed when you accepted this assignment. It was not an assignment that ended when the bad guys got taken down in the Medellin drug cartel. And Bob, I close every segment with the statement, dream big and dare to fail. And you are the epitome, as is your entire family, of dreaming big and daring to fail. And I'd like to thank you for providing the clip that our viewers are going to see based on the movie The Infiltrator. I encourage folks, if you don't have the book, get the book, The Infiltrator, and watch the movie. I've watched it about 50 times. Honestly, 50 times. And every time I see it, there's something else I get out of it. It's an incredible piece of work. And I'd like to thank you, Bob, for being an incredible human being and an incredible patriot.
Well, thank you. It was a privilege to serve, and I'm glad I got that opportunity.
And so am I. And so is every American, and so is every person of the world. Folks, until next time, this is Dave Janda signing off. Be like Bob. Dream big and dare to fail.